can't tell you how long.
Yay for Thursday.
Yes. Hello.
Thelma, how are you? Thank you for being here to chat with me.
Thank you for being here.
And you guys, thanks for coming.
Well, first I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being you, for being an inspiration, such an incredible, incredible model. Thank you for that. I think everyone joins me in wanting to express gratitude first. So we have a little time here to chat.
We do.
And, you know, I think there's so many things we could talk about, but I would love to start with the fact that you redefined the role of what it means to be a First Lady, both here and abroad. You did. How did the experience of being First Lady change you while you were inhabiting that role and changing it?
Wow, that's a deep question. And I've been pondering it a lot because I'm working on a book. So I've had, you know, what I've been saying is that for 8 years, this 8-year journey, I call it a 10-year journey because the campaign is 2 years. But for the last decade, I haven't really had a lot of time to reflect because the White House is that entire journey. I say it's like being shot out of a cannon while drinking from a fire hose. So you don't really get much time to reflect. I know that there are weeks that would go by, there'd be amazing things, some great state dinner or concert, and by the end of Friday, somebody would say, wasn't that fun on Tuesday? And I'd be like, what happened? I don't even remember Tuesday. But now that I've had a good year or so to kind of think about it, I think that I have become more patient, more optimistic, if you can believe that. Because what our time in the White House allowed me, my husband, my family to do is really see this country up close and personal. I mean, we got to spend time in people's homes and go to small towns and be in community centers and give lots of hugs and play with kids in daycare centers. And regardless of where we went, whatever the political bent was, we were welcomed with open arms. As Barack has said, and it was confirmed over our 8 years, that the American people are decent people, and folks fundamentally do want the same things. You know, when I started campaigning for Barack, I know I told the story of my father, Fraser Robinson, who was a working class guy who didn't want much. You know, my dad wasn't asking for much. He just wanted a decent job so that he could pay his bills on time and maybe send his kids to college and retire with a little dignity and respect. He didn't want more than that. He didn't want to be rich. He didn't need stuff. And he grew up in a time and raised his family in a time where a working class blue collar guy could have a home and retire and live with respect. And that's, I think, is what most Americans want. And I came to know that. And I came to be more sympathetic and empathetic of people. Even those that were critical of me or my husband, the question that I had wasn't, well, why? Why don't you agree? But let me try to understand your challenges and your struggles. So I think I became more patient and more empathetic. And I think that, you know, we all need to kind of hold on to that truth, because that is real. No matter how you're feeling today, that is the reality of who we are in this country. We don't talk about it enough. It doesn't get reported. It's not sexy, but it is the truth of who we are. We have always been a great nation.
One word that's consistently used to describe you is authentic. What does that mean to you, and how have you stayed so real through this entire experience?
Marion Robinson, my mother. My mother doesn't play with phony. She doesn't allow that to go on, so I kind of was raised in that. But the authentic to me means that the Michelle Obama you see here is the Michelle Obama you'll see backstage, the Michelle Obama you'll see at home in my jeans, in my cutoffs, in my, sweaty clothes with no makeup on. It is a consistency of just being me, which has made this job of being a political spouse easier, because I don't have to keep up with who I am. I'm just me. I don't have to pretend to do something. I can be comfortably me all the time. But it does start with being comfortable with your own voice. And that's something that I'm exploring as I think about this book. It's like, well, what makes a person comfortable with their own voice? And I think you have to be comfortable with your story. And I think we live in a time where we unfortunately come to think that there are only certain stories of living life that are legitimate. That somehow it looks like wealth, or it looks like power, or it has a certain gender, that it owns power, that there's a trajectory that we all sort of think, now that's what success means, that's a balanced story. We see it today. We see it in our elections and who gets elected and why. But the truth is that all of our stories are valid. But if we don't own them, if we're not proud of those stories and all the bumps and bruises along the way, that's why I talk about my upbringing. Because my upbringing is humble, but it is probably more like everybody's than anybody's, right? I think I share more with people because of my flaws and the mistakes that I made and the challenges that I faced. So I'm proud of that story. So I can own it. I can own that as being authentically me. So I'm not hiding anything. I'm not trying to fake anybody out. I'm not pretending to be somebody else, because I actually like who I am. And I think that that's the work that I hope that we all start to do, is we start to be proud of our own stories and find our voices and live our own authentic life, because there is no such thing as a right way to live and to be in this world or in this country. So that's what I think it means to be authentic.
And did you get that from your parents and your upbringing?
Oh,
did you
yeah.
see that in the lessons they
learned? Yeah. I mean, my parents weren't wealthy. They didn't have money. My parents didn't go to college, or they didn't finish. They started, but just didn't have the motivation. They didn't have parents like them at home, encouraging them in that way. They've made mistakes in their lives, and I grew up in an extended family of just regular folks. I mean, my relatives were carpenters and teachers and police officers, and they weren't fancy folks, but we had a good childhood, living in a little bitty apartment. My father, we never owned our home. My father had his Buick 227, his deuce and a quarter, and he kept that thing polished and pristine. Took it to Sears to have the tires rotated. We'd stop at Sears and get our candy corn and peanuts from the little hot vending machine. Young people, you don't understand this. So I'm just reminiscing for people in my generation. Sears was the place to be. You got everything at Sears. You got school clothes, you got your oil change, you got food, you got a washing machine. There is no place that exists like that nowadays, but Walmart, run a day. But that's who we were. My grandfather, Southside, my mother's father was a carpenter who couldn't join a union because he was an African American. And as a result, a lot of my relatives worked on the outskirts of professions because they were limited because of race. I had an Uncle Pete who was a jitney driver because he couldn't get licensed to be a taxi driver, so he couldn't drive a regular taxi. My grandfather on my father's side, who we called Dandy, was a smart, brilliant man, but he couldn't get into some of the trades in the union, so he was a postal worker. So those are the stories of my childhood. Not fancy people, but regular, hard-working folks. And we laughed and we listened to music and we watched our parents play bid whist. And there, lots of references. That was my upbringing. Everybody lived within a few blocks from each other. You know, your extended family lived around the corner. We took care of our elderly. We lived with my Aunt Robbie, who was also my piano teacher. Those are the stories that, you know, keep me grounded. That's who I spend Thanksgiving with. Those are the voices in my head. And yeah, that's America. That's America too. That's all of us. Those are our stories. So yeah, it keeps you focused on your truth and what you have to do. So I am grateful to my parents, to my extended family, all my cousins. You know, they have helped to make me the woman I am today. And I'm grateful for that.
So much of what people respect about you and President Obama is the fact that your relationship really feels like one of equals, right? You had a primary breadwinner role in your family. You were a working mother, right? Occupying many different kinds of worlds and lives through your work. How did you do that? And what can you say about what that means for women's lives now?
Oh yeah, that balance. And every time I talk to young people, I was just talking to a group of our interns at our new office, and a lot of the questions revolve around how, you know, they're starting to think about getting married and having their families. And this is a thing that weighs on young people. I wish I had somebody to talk to about life and marriage and relationships and balance. But what I tell them is that balance is a practice art, because we don't talk about what balance is. We're not a nation, a workforce that does balance well. We're not socialized in that way. We're either overworked or, you know, or we're trying to juggle too much, or we think we have to do it all. And that's an interesting thing that my generation has come to feel, is that, you know, being a great wife, mother, worker means you do it all, and you do it all alone. And not even my mother's generation, my grandparents, as I told you, everybody lived in an extended family kind of community. So no one was doing it all. You know, you always had a great aunt or an uncle or a grandmother that helped with the kids. Someone was cooking while somebody else was picking up the kids. You just had that support. But now that people get educated, they have to move for jobs, they move away from that community. A lot of people, young couples, are isolated, you know, so they are dependent on childcare. And I went through that before my mother retired. You know, the whole thing when I had kids, everything was fine. We were equals, Barack and I. We traveled on independent professional paths, and he did his thing and I did my thing, and we came together on a weekend and had a great date, and he wasn't annoying, and anyway. And then we had kids, which, as I tell young people, kids are your first joint project with your significant other. Until then, you really aren't testing all that equality stuff. That's not really tested. Everybody's happy and doing their own thing and going to the gym and stuff. Then that baby shows up, and you love this baby, right? This is like the most important project you will ever have. It's not a report. It's not, you know, it's not a thing. It's your child, and you love that child, and you don't want to mess that up. So now you have to figure out, okay, we have a child. Who's staying home? Who gives? Who's doing laundry? Who's continuing to go to their workouts undeterred? You know? And who helps you take care of the baby? And I struggled with that. You know, would I stay home? Would I work part-time? Did I feel good with my child in daycare? Could we afford a babysitter at home? The stress mounts, and that's when you really start practicing balance in a marriage. And what I learned, first and foremost, was that I couldn't do it alone, and that if Barack couldn't give me the support I needed at the time, because he was running for something, which he was always running for something. So, but I looked to my friends, I looked to my girlfriends, I looked to my mother, and I stopped resenting him for what he couldn't do because I found ways to get it done for myself. So I started to learn how to protect myself and my time, and that practice carried over into my work. As the girls started getting older, I realized that, you know, when you're working, you have people out there who have schedules, and they have schedulers, and they plan, and they call you, and they ask you years in advance to agree to be at a conference or to sign up for a series of meetings. And if you're not careful, you look up and you've given all your time away before your children have had a chance to even ask for anything because they don't have schedulers. So I found that in order to protect that time, I would do this with my assistant. I would start the year and look at the calendar and put everything for my children and for me on first before I said yes to anybody. And then I filled up my time first with us. And then I would always find there was plenty of time for everything else, and it allowed me to say no. And that's something that I think a lot of women, we have a tough time saying no. But if you block that time off, just like you do for a meeting or for travel and all the important things you do for work, you say no when your calendar is filled with work. Fill it up with you. Fill it up with your children first. And then be comfortable saying no when you can. And again, that's a luxury that I had because I was a professional. I had leverage. I had flexibility. That's not a tactic that works for every working woman because, you know, a teacher doesn't have that kind of flexibility. A bus driver doesn't have that kind of flexibility. So then it's incumbent upon us, the women who do have leverage, to start making those cases for the people who don't have that voice. To figure out in our workplaces how we create that space for them as well. But I say it's practice, because you have to practice putting yourself a little higher on your priority list. And it's not a natural instinct. So I've learned that, and I was able to carry that into the White House. So a lot of what I learned before I entered the White House. And I came in with the same tools where I protected my time and made sure that, you know, I was doing the things that my kids needed before I even did what the country needed. Because my view is that, you know, I can't speak about what all children should have if I can't take care of my own children. So I needed to make sure I had that on point.
So what do you wish you knew when you started this journey? I mean, you know, take us back to Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2009. What do you wish you knew that day?
That it was going to be that cold. I would have worn boots and a hat. That day is such a blur. You know, I always talk about how the transition that happens from one president to the next, it's crazy, people. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, election day, you're a normal person. By the end of the evening, your life changes so fundamentally, and you have no time. You have to find new schools for your kids. You move from your home. You have to develop your own staff, not just the president through his transition team, but me as well. You have to plan to live in a house that you've never seen and really won't have access to until the day you move in, not fully. You have to figure out what paper towel you're getting and what toilet paper you're going to use. All those little things are still out there. You got to make sure your kids have beds and pillows. And then there's a financial crisis, and a series of crises that you're facing. And then you have to be inaugurated, and there's a parade, and it's, you know, and it goes on forever. And it's wonderful, but you stand there in the freezing cold, wondering why it's so cold and why this place doesn't have heat. And for the first time in your life after that parade, you turn around and you walk into a house you've never been in, and then you have to get ready for 35,000 balls. So you're freezing cold, you don't know where the bathroom is, you don't know where your kids are. I'm like, what happened to them? Where did they go? What room are they in? Which of these doors are where my children are? And you have to get beautiful.
Right.
And you're hoping to get something to eat. And then you're at a ball dancing with this president of the United States. You kidding me? You're the president? So I've gotten lost in that whole, that's what that day is like. It's flashback, so let me snap out of it. I'm back here, I'm in Connecticut. It's over, everything is okay. So what was the question?
Oh my God.
What you wish you knew.
Oh God, yeah, that. Yeah, I wish that I knew that no matter how hard you try to, you know, do the right thing and pick issues that, you know, are seemingly non-controversial, like helping children eat healthy. I mean, who would have thought that people would have been like, nope, nope, nope. What are you thinking? Who do you think you are? Telling my children to eat vegetables and drink water. The nerve of you. It's like, yeah, I guess. That sometimes in a complicated country like ours, you can't please everybody, you know? There are gonna be people that just find the worst in you, no matter how hard you try, and that's okay. And you know, but I wish I kind of knew that, just how fully, you know, some of this stuff was like, you have a health care? You really don't want people to have health care? All right, then if we're not gonna have health care, this was my thing. Let's make sure we're healthy. You know? Because that's really all you got. You know? Especially our kids. We don't want government messing with healthcare, then let's eat some vegetables and exercise.
Oh my God.
You at least cut your chances in half that you'll even have to deal with the healthcare system. That was my logic. And, you know, some people were like, nope, nope. So, you know, the politics of it all, even for somebody like me who had seen politics at the state level in the US Senate, you know, the level of obstruction and just sort of, nope, we're not gonna work with you no matter what you do, that was a little shocking, because you always sort of think, well, you know, that's true before you understand what we're really gonna try to do, and did you read that bill? Did you look at the legislation? But that's politics. So that would have been nice to have a better sense of, but we got a handle on it, and with my initiatives, the thing that I just tried to do is stay away from anything that involved Congress. And that's not really a joke. I wasn't really trying to be funny, but that was really what I said, was like, just let's talk directly to the American people and try to get people to change on their own. Because working in a legislative structure, especially when you're First Lady, you really don't have any legislative authority, you don't have a lot of staff, you don't have a lot of resources. It made me have to be, my team be a lot more creative about how we built partnerships and how we leverage things and how we tried to have an impact at the cultural level rather than doing things legislatively. And I think on a lot of our issues we were able to move the needle, and I'm pretty proud of our team for what we were able to do under the circumstances.
So but that brings us to the point point, how did you handle the pressure of other people's expectation of the critique? How were you able to keep your focus?
Yeah, and I talk to young people about this a lot because you have two choices when you are under the spotlight, and you know, the spotlight always leads to that critique. That's part of it. You know, especially now that you know, politics has been celebritized. It's almost as if people think that, you know, politics is the same thing as like my kids are like Selena Gomez, that they want to be in the tabloids because they're famous. You know, so especially with social media, there's more commentary, there's more anonymity, so there's more, you know, comfort with saying crazy stuff that people would never say to your face. We all know how that goes. All of that. This was the first administration to really be operating in that milieu in the way that it has fully developed. When we came into office, Twitter had just sort of become a thing. You know, it really wasn't a thing. Barack never had an iPhone. The notion that he would be tweeting, oh, you know, that just, you know, I mean, there was a question of whether he could even have an email, let alone, you know, because of the security and all of that sort of stuff. So that's changed, but that started in our administration. The intensity of the 24-hour news cycle and the need to fill content and so on and so forth. That came to really be a thing during the Obama administration. Not to say that other administrations didn't deal with it, but it was a different level of intensity. So it was kind of a new focus. But in that situation, as I tell young people who find themselves in that position, you have two choices. You can read the negative stuff and consume it, or you can choose to read the good stuff. I mean, it's one of those things, like, for every negative you know, critique there was about me out there, there were dozens, hundreds, thousands of wonderfully positive things that I could take in. You know, so I encourage young people to do what I did. Don't take in that negative energy. You know, so I limited how much I read in the press. Not to say that I didn't read dissenting information. You know, opinions that disagreed with me were different from people who were just hating out there. You know, so I just learned, like, oh, yeah, no, that headline just sounds snarky, so I'm not going to read that article. This sounds substantive, so I'll read it. And I also had staff communications people who could cull through stuff and get me things that were substantive rather than just nasty. So in a way, I learned to protect myself. You know, and you know, you have to do that in this sort of time in our lives, that you have to be vigilant about protecting yourself. And that's what I did. I chose to take in the good stuff and feed off of that, and sort of let the other stuff be. But it helps to be a grown-up in this situation, you know. It's easy for me to adopt that when a lot of young people just haven't learned. They don't know themselves well enough to know who they are in the face of negative feedback. You know, something negative that somebody else says about me that doesn't know me has nothing to do with me. So a lot of the negative stuff, I would just go, these people absolutely don't know me. Because whoever they're talking about is somebody they've made up in their head, and maybe one day I'll meet her and I'll have a good conversation with her because she sounds crazy, that person that they don't like, but that's certainly not me. And that's the beauty of being an adult in this situation, is that I had 40 some odd years to really know who I was. And it's another reason why I don't recommend that young people get put in that spotlight before they really know who they are. It's a difficult thing to manage when you're in your 20s or your teens, when you don't know who you are, which is one of the reasons why we have been very protective of our girls in the midst of this, because they're just beginning to understand who they are. They don't need to read what some crazy person says about them and have that be the energy that they carry with them for years to come.
How have you done that? How have you protected them, and what did you think you needed to do when you knew that this moment would come for them?
Well, our communications team worked very closely with the White House Correspondence Bureau, the team of news people who follow the president around. They're with him all the time. They're in the White House. The press corps. There was sort of an arrangement that we had. It was that you are not allowed to publish anything about the girls unless they're in an official, at an official event. So if we bring them to the turkey pardoning or to the Christmas tree lighting, well, of course, you can talk about the shoes they had on and whether they were smiling enough, and So in those moments where at least they knew they were on, I would talk to them about everybody's looking at you all the time. Don't pick your nose. And so they had to grow up a little bit faster because, they're still teenagers. And you know how teenagers have that, this is their happy face, this is their everything face. And so, we're in a row watching some Chinese jugglers and they're performing and they care so much, and my girl's away. And I'm like, you guys okay? They're like, yeah, this is great. I'm like, are you really happy? It's like, no, we're having a great time. And it's like, well, you need to smile. I am smiling. It's like, no, smile like me. And it's like, Mom, you look crazy. You don't just smile for no reason. So they still have teenager thoughts, and I'm like, I'm gonna tickle you. This is what I'm saying to my kids when we're lined up. It's like, look at me, we're laughing. Let's laugh.
Oh my God. Hilarious.
Because I'm trying to protect them from themselves, because the shot is gonna be Obama girls bored at the event. And it's like, no, they weren't bored, they're 13 and 10. So we would have those kind of real life conversations just about how you have to carry yourself, even if you're 14. But when they weren't in the spotlight, when we didn't bring them and we didn't bring them often, that was the other thing. It was just rare that you saw them for that very reason. I didn't feel like that was a normal thing for a kid to have to be able to do. But when they were off of the radar, the goal was you don't talk about them, you don't film them, and if you do, you may never ever get an interview with the president ever again. And then you had to monitor it, and for the most part, people respected that, and we are grateful to those who did respect their privacy and allow them to go to school. But otherwise, we made sure their lives were normal. I always equate it to how we treated them was how you treat a toddler when they bump their head on something and they look up at you like, should I be upset? And you're like, how you react is how they react. So all the while, that's what we did with the girls. Yep, you'll be fine. This is normal. A guy on your roof, your school roof with a camo vest and a machine gun, girl, that's normal. You'll be fine. No. I know you don't want to go. Get up. You're going to school. You're going to keep it normal. A motorcade to the parent-teacher conference. Yep, with 18 motor bikes in front and lights and sirens. Yep, this is what we do. So they're looking at us trying to see like whether they can milk this for some sympathy, and it's like, nope, you were lucky. You better be glad. You have butlers. Are you kidding me? You want to know how I got my food when I was growing up? So it'd be between me and Barack. It's like, don't pout over this. So that was our attitude. It's like, You were fine. So just get up and live your life and smile when we're at events. So they went to sleepaway camp and they had sleepovers and they went to parties, and it was always the balance of as they came to be teenagers, giving them enough rope so they could learn how to live and make mistakes as teenagers, because they were always with their Secret Service detail. So I tried to make sure I got information about stuff they did wrong, like regular parents, through other parents rather than through their agents. Where are you? Where are they? What's going on? Because I didn't want their agents to be like their parents and telling on them so that they trust them. So there's a lot of little stuff like that. And when you didn't see me being First Lady, that's what I spent every other minute of my time doing. Dealing with these teenagers and their lives. It was just exhausting. Teenagers, I mean, gosh. Does anybody out there have them? Oh my goodness. It's exhausting.
In the White House, no.
In the White House. Oh, let me tell you what we did the last day we were in the White House, right? We're trying to get out. The Trumps are coming. And you have to move, right? So the day before we're moving, boxes are being packed, and what does all the girls come and go, we want to have a sleepover. And it's like, are you kidding me? Tonight, not everybody, this is everybody's last time for sleeping over. And, so we had a house full of girls at the White House. And I was like, do you know how you're going to get out? Because all the streets were closed, and like, we'll call Uber. It's like, you can't get Uber. It's Inauguration Day. So I'm arguing, and all of the little girls there, all the girls, because they've all grown up, these are friends and girls have had, they're in tears, and they're sad. And I'm like, I know, get out. Get out. You gotta go. They wanted to have their breakfast. They all ordered their favorite thing, and that was our life. While all the regular formal stuff was going on, they were being kids, friends in the house, and dogs running around and pooping on the, carpet. It's like that was all happening up on that third floor where we were living. So their lives were as normal as we could make it.
But I think I remember watching the Democratic National Convention in 2016 when you made your amazing speech. And like many others, I just stood in front of the television completely cheering for you, but also crying when you spoke about that moment of waking up every day in a house that was built by slaves and watching your two beautiful African-American daughters there. Can you talk about that? Like just the perception of what that meant for you on a day-to-day level?
Well, you could see it and feel it in the staff there, because in the White House, the staff doesn't transition with the family. All the people who support the first families over the years, many of them have been there since Nixon. There are folks who have seen the White House go from family to family, and they service each family with integrity and with honesty and with love. I mean, that's what makes the White House a home. It's the people who work there. But they have seen some history. And just to imagine what some of those African-American butlers who have served families for decades, I don't want to speak for them, but I only imagine what it felt like to be serving and working for and greeting every day these two little black girls, who many of whom look like their daughters and granddaughters, and there was those were the times when you fully understood the impact of what our presence in the White House meant for so many. And that was just in the White House. But I can't tell you how many, people, older folks or people who tell me about their grandparents and great-grandparents who were able to vote before they passed, people who thought they would never live to see a black family in the White House. And we felt that even in the first campaign. I mean, there was a point when, after the Iowa caucuses, that it felt like a lot of people in the black community felt like they could believe in the possibility. Because I don't think, up until that point, there were a lot of people who didn't believe that this country would embrace a black man, let alone a black man named Barack Obama. And after Iowa, people slowly kind of started to breathe out, you know, and you could feel it in the crowds and in the energy. And that was true for every American, regardless of race, but there was a particular fear that occurs in the black community because of our history, because of King, because of Malcolm, because of so many who tried to do so much and were stopped in their tracks. There were people who were praying for our safety because they had lived that history. They remembered that was real. But the thing that I want to point out was that kind of hope, it stretched through this country like a wildfire, you know, and people of all backgrounds and walks of life and all parties felt a sense of possibility and, I will say, pride in what was happening in the country, and it felt different. But in the black community, it meant something else for those who were the descendants of slaves and had seen this country go through such a tremendous transformation. So that was never lost on us, not for a minute.
And it seemed in some of the efforts you made in the White House was to open it up, right? You referred to it often as the people's house, and wanting Americans to understand what that house meant to you, but also could mean to us. Why was that important to you?
Well, because I was one of those kids, like so many kids from working class backgrounds, from small towns and rural communities and inner cities, whose worlds can be limited by fear and lack of access to resources. I was one of those kids. I grew up with those kids in Chicago. I grew up with kids who lived on the South Side but never ever got to go to the Art Institute. They didn't even know that building existed. Or kids who lived on the West Side, grew up their whole lives and had never seen the lake. I know that there are kids who live in Anacostia or rural parts of Virginia who don't get to come into the Smithsonian. They don't feel like those places belong to them, even though they do. These are public places, but there is a psychological barrier, an emotional barrier for a lot of young people. And then when you get to these places, you do realize that they're exclusive, you know, that there are donors and heads of state and wealthy socialites who have been to the White House again and again and again. You go to people's homes and they have picture after picture of president after president. And it's like, well, you've done this a lot. So why don't we make sure that we're really opening up this experience to more people, that we're doing enough that allows the house to be open, because there are only so many tours that can happen at so many times that the house is, if there's an event going on, tours have to shut down, because the White House is a kind of small place. You can only do kind of one thing at a time. So every time there was a chance to expand those numbers, you know, we grew the Easter egg roll to 30,000 participants would come through that lawn in the course of the day. Our 4th of July picnic turned into a way for us to thank hundreds and hundreds of military families, and then to open up the South Lawn concert to even more people. So our view was, how do we get more, how do we do more and get more people in? Because I know how important it is for a child like me to walk through those doors and feel like that important place, that iconic house, is as much their birthright as anyone's. So whenever we did fancy event, and Thelma, you've been a part of many of these efforts. You know, if we had a music event, there were the fancy people that came at night, or if we had a state dinner, there were the important people because you only had a certain number of seats. But we would always do a companion event in the afternoon for kids that were flown in from around the country from all kinds of backgrounds so that they could taste the state dining food or see the place settings or hear from the artists that were performing. It would be a special viewing. We did that with actually Hamilton. Hamilton, sort of Lin-Manuel came full circle through our White House because he performed for the very first time the opening number of Hamilton when we held a spoken word event. The very first spoken word event, mind you, held at the White House. Right below the portraits of George and Martha Washington, is almost as if they were going, what? But Lynn performed, and we kind of laughed at Lynn because he said, I'm going to do a whole Broadway production about Hamilton. And we were like, yeah, right. So cute. And then he did. And then it was the most amazing thing, and the entire cast came back to the White House, and they were there for an entire day. We flew hundreds of kids in from across the country. They did workshops all day, each of the cast members. They went over lyrics and production and music, and they were in the East Room and the Red Room and all the rooms all day. And then they ended the day with a performance in the East Room just for those kids. And it was amazing. The entire cast was there. So that's the kind of stuff, you know, that we tried to do. Think about all the kids who didn't get to see Hamilton, to have them see it in the White House. Oh my God, you know you've changed lives just from that day. So, fun for us, for sure.
And it seems, and actually I have to say, both of those moments are on YouTube, right? Lin-Manuel's first performance, and then when they came back, so it's worth watching.
Check it out.
But it seemed a lot of the way you opened up the house was through the arts. And I, you know, have always been grateful for your incredible support of the arts, your public support in the White House, in your travels around the world, in your private support just of artists themselves and really embracing them. And so why was that the way that you chose as a path to open up what could happen in the White House, but also how we could understand American culture?
Yeah, well, as you know, Thelma, arts are our hook. You know, it's the thing that we all can share. Mm-hmm. You know, we may not speak the same language, we may not really understand all of our stories and experiences, but we all know a good song. You know, we all can appreciate a beautiful voice or a beautiful piece of artwork. It is a common language that we share, and it is beautiful. I grew up in a house of art. My father, who had MS, was a sculptor and a painter. He could have had an opportunity to go to the Art Institute if he could have afforded it, but he couldn't, so he joined the Army instead. But he would make sculptures, and he did all of the paintings for our little plays and performances. My aunts were music teachers and choir directors. All of my family loved jazz in a way that it just blasted through our houses at every event. I mean, we opened birthday gifts to Ella Fitzgerald and blew out candles to Coltrane. And my grandfather gave me my first Stevie Wonder album. And so, you know, music and art was something that was in me. As a poor kid with not much, we had that. But growing up, I also saw how the arts was that hook for a lot of kids. You know, so much untapped talent. Young people who may not connect to school because of a math assignment, maybe they're not great readers, but it can be their love of the arts or sports that will get them connected in a way that will allow them to see why school is important. So engaging our young people in this way in the arts and at the White House, to me, was just, it was a no-brainer. And it also serves to reinforce the notion that the arts cannot be a privilege in this country. That if we, you have to make sure that it is accessible. Because you think of all the Lin-Manuel Mirandas out there, all of the talent that goes untapped and untrained, what we miss, you know, the hole that is left in our society because we have let a lot of that talent flounder. And just imagine if you're one of those kids who has that gift and you have no outlet for it, which so many do, it would make you angry. It would make you frustrated. It would make you violent in a way because you can't express that thing that God gave you. But there are millions of kids who are in that position because talent doesn't know income, it doesn't know race, it doesn't know region. It comes with you. You were born with it. So it is a reminder that it is something that we have to make sure is available to all our kids. It's the thing that soothes the savage beast, and that is for real. Arts is that thing.
Inspired you when you were a young woman? What was at the base of what made you think you could be who you've become?
You know, I think I'm exploring this too, y'all. I'm trying to figure this out. But I think my parents had a lot to do with it. I think that they were unique in they didn't operate under the school of thought that kids are to be seen and not heard. They relished our thoughts and ideas. They thought we were funny. They thought we were smart. They told us we were smart. They were our advocates even at a young age, even though we went to the neighborhood school around the corner. I got a lot of positive messages all around me. And as a young girl, I had strong men in my life who never abused me physically, emotionally. I felt the real, genuine, trustful love of men in my life, from my father to my uncles to my grandfather on down, which is, it shouldn't be something that I even would have to mention. But when we live in a world, not a country or a culture, in a world where young girls are literally in danger of some kind of mess, you know, whether it's what a man says to us or how he looks at us or an opportunity that is taken from us or somebody who's got their foot on our necks. It is such a sad, common existence for women and girls in this country. So I was one of the lucky ones. You know, I am what it looks like when a girl is loved and nurtured and invested in. This is what you get. And you have to remember that in these times. You know, I can't tell you how sick it makes me the more I see the uncovering of the truth that all of us women know has been out there. That there is an ugliness there. And it's not just, again, in the United States, it is happening around the world. Millions of girls who don't go to school because people don't think they're worthy of going to school. You know, it's not just resources or lack of funding. It's that culturally, fundamentally, in their homes, in their families and communities, boys are valued more than girls. So they aren't viewed as being worthy of an education. Now, we're not there, but we're not far enough from there for us to rest on our laurels and to wonder what's going on. So if we want young women, and we need young women to be strong and have voices and advocate for themselves, then we have to start realizing how much work we have to do. And that, I'm talking to the men out there who cannot be innocent bystanders and complacently watching this happen to who are your daughters and your wives and your sisters. But I am the product of love and support. It's not, it had nothing to do with money. It had nothing to do with position. It had nothing to do with networking. My parents could never give me any of that. But that's the important thing to know, that what girls and young people need, they need consistent love and support and the belief of somebody out there that they're worthy. And I had that. I had that.
How do we make that possible for all young people? You know, what's the lever that needs to be pushed, that we begin to value our young people equally, to give them that possibility?
You know, the grown-ups in the room have to step down from the pedestals that we all put ourselves on as grown-ups. You know, we have to stop giving lip service to the fact that we believe in the investment in the next generation. You know, right now it is lip service. You know, if we don't really want to put money into public education, if we don't really believe that part of that investment starts with our schools and creating some equity so that you don't have some kids who get to go to private schools where their parents are paying $40,000 a year to get them ready for college, and there are a bunch of millions of kids where people don't want their taxes raised to help them at all. We can't pretend to be that country if we're playing around with education in that way. But then that sometimes means sacrifice. Well, what are we willing to give up? You know, how important is that tax break? How many more, you know, man caves do we need? When is enough? So that we take some of this wealth and really, really, truly, actually invest it in our kids, in all of our kids. So we've got to do some soul searching first. I think the lever is the soul searching, you know, and it's not enough that we invest in our kids. That's what I always say. It's not, you know, if I want Malia and Sasha to live in a wonderful world, it's not enough for me to make sure they're educated. I've got to worry about every other kid they're going to grow up with and who's going to be walking the streets with them. I've got to value them and their worth as much as I do my own kids. And so I think we need to have some of those conversations to figure out what we truly, truly believe we're ready to do and sacrifice for our kids.
Many of your initiatives as First Lady focused on kids and families. Why did you, I mean, you talked a bit about why you picked some of those issues, but how are you going to continue that work?
Well, we're working right now on the Obama Presidential Center. A couple weeks ago, we had a summit in Chicago that gave people a sense of what that work will look like. We gathered about 500 young leaders from around the world. I mean, people who were working in small villages in Africa and folks who are working in education in Kentucky. I mean, it was a very diverse group of young leaders who were already doing the work. And pulling them together and bringing that energy together and coupling them with a lot of established leaders from around the world and beginning to give them the tools and the resources and the support and the networking. So our view is that, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you should run, and my view is it's not enough. I mean, if we keep looking for that one person to run, we're getting it wrong. We don't need another Michelle or Barack. We need thousands and thousands of them all over the world. So our view is that the best way for us to leverage our power right now is to try to shift that spotlight on some of these other young leaders so that we do have a cadre of trained, prepared, empathetic, knowledgeable, world-traveled, exposed people to be the next Congress people and mayors and presidents around the world. And so that's where we hope to focus some of our energy with young people. Those were young adult leaders, but we want to trickle that down and start finding those kids in high schools and in colleges across the country who are eager to get involved but don't have a contact or a network. They're not of a family where they would know how to enter politics even they wanted to. They never heard what it means to be a community organizer. We want to try to expose some more young people to what those possibilities are. And I'll continue to focus on girls' education, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And we're spending this time really trying to shape and understand what we can do, how we can do, what those partnerships will look like. So the work hopefully will continue. The summit was exciting. It was a powerful couple of days, and it speaks to a lot of great work that I think we can do in the years ahead. Yeah.
Seems to very consciously, you and the president made the decision for the center to be on the South Side.
Oh, absolutely. The Presidential Center will be located in South Shore. It's in sort of the South Shore Hyde Park area, right near the Museum of Science and Industry. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, it'll be the first presidential in an urban community, and predominantly African American community. But the South Side, that part of the city made both me and Barack. I mean, it was where I grew up, it's where my family was raised, it's where we met and married, and where we raised our children, and it's the place where we worshiped, and so we owe a lot to the South Side of Chicago. And there's a lot of work to be done in that city. So the goal is that the center will be a hub to draw some attention to not just the city of Chicago, but the South Side, and really help some of those kids in that community gain some exposure to international leadership. During that summit, I did a surprise visit to one of the high schools in the area, and I brought Prince Harry there.
Oh my God.
We surprised a group of kids, high school kids.
Just walked in?
Just walked in, freaked them out. They were freaked out, but then they composed themselves, and we had about an hour-long conversation. And Prince Harry was amazing, and they slowly came out of their shells, and they talked about the pride that they had in their community, and they had tough questions about, the construction of the library. I mean, they were amazing, but it's that kind of opportunities that we have to bring some real powerful people into their midst. And once again, I walked out of there, both Prince Harry and I, we knew that hour changed the life of some kid in that room in a way that we won't be able to measure until we see it actually happen. And that's what we want to be doing.
So tell all of us, how are you staying optimistic right now? This is the question for me.
That was like, can we talk?
Yes.
Can we talk? Here's how first of all, it helps being married to Barack, because he is truly an optimist, and he makes a lot of sense. And here's what he says when I ask him that question. He says that we are still living in one of the best times in the history of the world to be alive. Things are so much better than they've ever been. We are safer. We are living longer. We have access to medical care. We are less cruel. There are fewer wars. There is no famine in our country right now. I mean, yes, there are still issues. We need to worry about climate change for sure. That's some scary business. But if you were to think along even the immediate historical timeline of when you'd want to be alive, at least for me, I wouldn't pick slavery. That didn't work out so well for us. There may be others who disagree, but I don't think that was such a great time. The world wars, the Civil War, the Depression, the past recession, we're doing okay. You know, it may not feel that way every day because, as I said earlier, we don't talk about the good stuff. We just harp on the bad. Malia pointed this out one time when we were on the roof of the White House, and it was the 4th of July, it was her birthday, and it was after the fireworks happened. And the entire Smithsonian is teeming with people. Millions of people come to see the fireworks, just like it happens in many, many towns and cities across America where thousands and thousands of people congregate and they watch the fireworks and they go home and there is no incident. And Malia, in just her youth, she said it's amazing that people can come together like that and then they just go home and everything is fine. You know, and the point that we made to her is because that's really what happens every day. Every day, for the most part, and this is not to put down anyone's tragedy, that there are bad things that happen to people every day. And in some communities, it's happening more disproportionately, and it's a shame, and we've got work to do. But the vast majority of the days go without issue. We are civilized and we are socialized, and for the most part we just are trying to live that life that my father was living. We're all just trying to get to work and we're trying to raise our kids, and we are decent neighbors. We're not perfect, but we are a good people, and we lose sight of that in this day and age when there's nothing but negative news, because that's the business of news. They are looking for the bad thing to tell you to worry about. They are trying to find the boogeyman and show it to you so you'll watch. So we are only focused, if we're watching the news, we're only watching about all the boogeymen out there. But things are okay, and we have survived a lot worse as a nation. And here's the other thing, as Barack always says, change, thank God, doesn't happen quickly from the top down. It happens from the bottom up. It really does. So, my recommendation to anybody who is feeling afraid and worried, focus on what you can control. Be a good person every day. Vote, read, treat one another kindly, follow the law, don't tweet nasty stuff. You know, be the people that you want this country to be. Just do that every day, because the impact of all of us in our everyday lives is greater than anything, no matter who's in the White House, of anything that can come from the White House. As I said, the White House doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. And as a citizen of this, you know, the White House doesn't change us as a nation either. It reveals who we are, and we're in control of that. So let's focus on that part of our story. You know, the everyday good work of just getting up every day, doing the right thing, being a good person to one another, empathize, being compassionate, you know, being open, being welcoming, not figuring out how to push people out, but how to bring people in, taking care of our kids. If we do that, we will get through anything, but it is on us. It's on us.
You have said there's so much history to be made. I want to thank you for making history and look forward to all the history you are yet to make.
Thank you.